There Will Be Wolves by Karleen Bradford. Chapter 11. Gradually, more and more figures came forth. Some searched among the bodies, others just wandered aimlessly, stunned. Priests made their way from body to body, giving what blessings, what absolutions they could. There was a large clearing on the side where Bruno and Ursula stood. The people began to collect there. For the most part, they had nothing but the clothing on their backs, but some of them carried bundles and hastily wrapped parcels. Many of them were wounded and bleeding. A figure emerged from the trees farther down the road. It was a man, riding a donkey, and Ursula recognized Peter the Hermit. No arrogant guard surrounded him now, although a few men followed him. Next, a group of horsemen emerged from around a bend in the road. Count Emile was in the lead. He slumped in the saddle, and his normally proud face was pale and haggard. He caught sight of Ursula and Bruno and rode up to them. "Ah," he said to Ursula, "so you survived, did you? That is well for me. Do you still have your medicines?" Ursula nodded. She could not trust her voice. "We will make camp here for this day," he went on, a trace of the old authority returning. "I doubt Nicetas's soldiers will return. There is no more sport for them here now. Later, when we are settled, you will come to me. I need your care." There was a long gash in one cheek, and blood seeped from the shoulder of his tunic. Ursula nodded again. The Count moved away from her, toward the hermit. Ursula turned back to Bruno. He reached out a hand to her. Together they returned over the rise to the wreck of their wagon. The fire had gone out, though Master William, sitting beside it, seemed not to realize it. He didn't answer when Ursula called out to him. "He must have food and something hot to drink," Ursula said to Bruno. "So must the child. Can you light the fire for us again?" Bruno just nodded. He still seemed incapable of speech. Her father did not ask what they had found. Ursula did not tell him. This time they made a larger fire. Together, Bruno and Ursula unhitched the body of the horse and dragged it as far as possible into the woods. Ursula saved 2 battered pots from the wagon. "What shall we do for water?" she asked. She was suddenly aware of a raging thirst. "There's a stream a ways back. I noticed it before," Bruno said finally. His voice was wooden. "Give me one of those pots, and I'll fetch some." He took the pot and disappeared with it. When he returned, Ursula gave some to Verity and her father, and then drank deeply of it herself. The cold sweetness of it was a shock. Then she set the pot on the fire to boil. She began to clean the grain as best she could. There were no vegetables left, and no meat. They would have to make do with gruel. She measured the kernels out carefully, trying to gauge how long the amount left would last. There was no telling when they would be able to get more. After she had fed her father and Verity, and made up a soothing tea for Master William, she allowed herself to start thinking about what they were going to do. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't go back. They would have to go forward, but without the wagon they would have to walk. Her father was too weak for that, she knew. Perhaps some of the wagons had been saved. Perhaps she could arrange with Count Emile to see that her father was allowed to ride. The Count owed him that, surely. She picked up her medicine bag. "I must go to Count Emile," she said. "I'll see if he will help us." Bruno just nodded. Like Ursula, he had not eaten. Ursula had to brace herself to go back over the rise between them and the road. She hurried toward the place where Count Emile and the hermit had set up their camp, trying as much as possible not to see the bodies strewn along the way. It was impossible, however, and at some point she even had to pick her way among them. By the time she reached Count Emile's fire, her chest was burning with the effort of holding in her grief. Campfires had sprung up at the edges of the woods, and people huddled around them, binding their wounds and eating what food they had managed to salvage, but everywhere there was still that same eerie silence. The Count glared at her as she stepped into the circle of his fire. "What took you so long, witch?" he snarled, obviously in pain. Ursula didn't react to the epithet. It was meaningless now. Without being asked, she prepared an infusion of the Count's medicine for him to drink first, even though it was only midday. He snatched it and gulped the liquid down thirstily, not seeming to notice or care about the heat of it. She had found some butterbur in a stream they had crossed only a few days earlier, and had collected the leaves and roots. It was just as well, she thought, as the supply of herbs was dwindling rapidly. Butterbur was especially good for skin wounds. She applied a poultice to the wound in the Count's shoulder, and showed him how to apply more of the cure to the gash on his face. The Count submitted to her ministrations impatiently. Ursula held her tongue as long as she worked, but when she had finished and the Count was resting more comfortably, she could keep silent no longer. "My lord," she began tentatively. "Yes?" He glanced at her sharply. "Are you not done now?" he asked. "Yes, my lord," she answered. "But there is something I would ask of you." "What?" he barked. "My father, my lord, he's very ill, as you know, and our wagon has been destroyed. If we are to go on, he cannot walk. Is there a wagon in which he might ride?" The Count snorted. "If we are to go on? Of course we are to go on. We are not to be conquered this easily. But there are no wagons for your father to ride in. None. They are all destroyed, most of the horses killed or stolen. What horses are left will be for the soldiers, and those of us who lead you, which, as is altogether fitting. Your father will walk. Like all the rest of you rabble, your father will walk. And if he continues to be too ill to come to me, then you will continue to do so. I have paid for his services. I intend to receive them, one way or another." "But everything you gave us, my lord, everything is gone." "That's hardly my fault. I've lost my own wagon as well. The hermit has lost his." His face darkened. Ursula had been about to remind the Count of the silver coins that he still owed her father, but she was abruptly silenced. If it were true that the Count had lost his own wagon, this would not be the time to beg for the money. And if Peter the Hermit had lost his wagon— Ursula remembered the rumors of the chest of money that he carried in it to buy supplies for the crusade. If that was gone too— "Begone, witch! We will march tomorrow for Constantinople, and I expect you to report to me after the evening meal as usual." Ursula started back to Bruno and her father without another word. Once she would have flared back in anger at the Count's words. Once she would have burned with fury to be spoken to so. She stepped carefully around the body of a young man. Once— how long ago that had been, she wondered dully. Surely it had been years ago. Surely it had been a lifetime ago. They left with dawn the next morning. With the rise of the sun came the warning of just how terrible the stench of the aftermath of this battle would be in a few hours. There was no way possibly to bury so many, although here and there some were trying to do so. They had just started out, Bruno carrying Verity and Ursula supporting her father, when they came upon a woman sitting, keening by the roadside. The body of a man lay beside her. "They've killed him," she moaned. "They've killed my husband and taken my children." She rocked back and forth in her agony. Ursula stopped beside her, leaned down and rested a hand on the woman's shoulder. "Come with us," she said softly. "We have a little food left. Come with us. We will help you." "How can I leave? I cannot leave." Try as she might, Ursula could not convince her. Finally, she took off her cloak and wrapped it around the woman. "God be with you," she whispered. "The true God, not the God of these wolves we travel with." And wolves the Crusaders seemed as they marched down the road through Sofia to Constantinople. Of the more than 20,000 that had left Cologne, fewer than 7,000 remained, and like a pack of hungry animals closing in on any prey they could find, they attacked everything and everyone that came within reach. It was every person for himself or herself. No one shared their plunder. Those who would not plunder, such as Ursula and Bruno, went without. In the evenings when she tended to the Count, he would sometimes give Ursula a handful of grain or a few spoiled vegetables, and that was what they subsisted on. When she begged for more, telling him that her father was dying, his face turned cold and closed. "He has been paid well. It's not my fault that he lost it. I can afford no more." She didn't even bother to ask for the silver owing to them. There was nowhere to spend it now. Villagers ran at the sight of them. The way grew even more wild and mountainous. with dark forests closing in on all sides of them. Walking became more and more difficult. The ground was never level. They were either climbing upward or descending rocky, narrow trails that at times seemed to barely cling to the sheer mountainsides. They forded icy mountain streams and picked their way around washouts on the steep paths where one false step or slip would send them hurtling to their death far below. At night, they slept huddled in their cloaks and in the remnants of the blankets they had saved. They tried to keep the fire going all night, to keep at bay the beasts they could hear hunting in the dark. They had used up the last of their grain, but still had to keep on guard to keep those even more desperate than they from stealing the few things that remained to them. Verity cried for her mother, but Ursula, although she had asked around and looked for Elizabeth constantly, had not been able to find any trace of her. The other minstrels, including Lemet, seemed to have vanished as well. Master William grew weaker each day. One night, when Ursula had just returned from tending to the Count, and had checked her father, who was sleeping in exhaustion by the fire, a noise in the bushes startled her. Bruno was not there. Samson barked and dashed to her side as she caught up a heavy branch. Verity, who had been trailing after her, took shelter behind her skirts. "Who's there?" Ursula demanded. Desperation had given her courage, and she felt little fear. Anyone who came to rob them would pay for it dearly. A figure stumbled, almost falling, into the circle of firelight. Ursula could see the ruins of a blue woolen cloak hanging in tatters around the woman's shoulders. Verity suddenly let out a cry, and before Ursula could stop her, tore across to her. At the same time, Ursula recognized Elizabeth. Her hair was hanging in filthy strands, and her face was mottled with dry blood and dirt. She seemed unable to talk, but she reached out her arms to Verity and enfolded the child within them. Bruno came back, carrying water. Since the massacre, he had not spoken more than necessary, and Ursula had been too frightened by the grimness of his face to try and find out what he was thinking or how he was feeling. Now, however, the tight, deep-etched lines around his mouth and eyes lightened somewhat. He put the water down hastily and hurried to support the woman. "Elizabeth!" he cried. "We feared you dead." "Come," Ursula added quickly. "Sit down by the fire. Let me help you." She gave her the last bit of thin soup they had been saving for breakfast, and then gently began to bathe her face. Elizabeth was bruised and beaten. There was a long gash on her forehead. "Lemet," Ursula began scathingly. "No," Elizabeth answered. Her voice was weak, and it obviously cost her an effort to speak. "It was not he, not this time. As soon as rumors began that the soldiers were about to attack us, he and the others disappeared. They just left. I know not where they have gone, nor even if they are still alive." "How came you by all this then?" Ursula asked, but of course she knew the answer. Elizabeth stroked Verity's head as the child nestled in her lap. "A soldier," she said simply. "He caught me as I ran. He beat me and wounded me when I would not submit to him willingly, but then he got drunk, and I escaped as he lay sleeping. I have been searching for you ever since. I was so afraid for you, for Verity." She stopped, her voice breaking. "Then I found a poor woman sitting by the roadside. She told me she had seen a girl of your description traveling with a boy, an old man, a dog, and a child. She told me you had given her your cloak. She said you were an angel." "First witch, now angel," Ursula muttered. "Each about as unlikely as the other. The world has surely gone mad." "I followed after as quickly as I could, and then today, after everyone had made camp, I found someone who could tell me where you were." She bent her head down to her child. "It's a miracle that I found you. A miracle that we're all still alive." The next day, they camped beside a turnip patch. It was well tended and obviously belonged to someone, but there was no one around. Ursula looked at it. Her father and Verity both desperately needed nourishment. With Elizabeth's return, they had another person to feed. Her own stomach was cramping with hunger, and they had nothing left at all in their camp. She hesitated no more than a minute and then walked into the field. It wasn't until she had begun digging up the turnips and filling the pocket she had made of her skirt that she realized Elizabeth had followed her. "You are still weak," Ursula said shortly. "I can manage this." "I want to help," Elizabeth answered simply. "There is little enough I can do to repay you for that which you have done for my daughter and me." "There is no need," Ursula began, but she was stopped by the look in Elizabeth's eyes. "I want to help," Elizabeth repeated. "And if it's possible now, I would be friends," she smiled. Ursula felt the iron noose of pain that had been constricting her chest loosen. She straightened up. The burden of turnips suddenly seemed lighter. She looked back at Elizabeth. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I would like that." She put out her hand and Elizabeth took it. They collected enough turnips for their pot that night, and as many as they could carry with them on the road. As they emerged, laden down with the stolen vegetables, Ursula saw Bruno looking at her. There was an odd expression on his face. Suddenly she remembered the young boy they had seen in the marketplace about to lose his hand. If he valued his hand so much, why did he steal? She had asked. Certain that the punishment was just, certain that stealing was unforgivable. Did he have a child to feed? A father to keep alive? Had his stomach been hurting as much as hers? She dropped her eyes from Bruno's and flushed. 2 nights later, she knew that her father could go on no longer. Bruno had almost had to carry him that day, and when Ursula had tried to get him to sip a little of the weak soup and hot tea she had made for him, the liquid just dribbled back out of his mouth. By the time she settled him down, wrapped in Bruno's cloak as well as his own against the night dew, he was delirious with fever and did not recognize her. He sank into a restless, confused slumber. Ursula sat over him, watching. "Go to the Count, Bruno," she said finally. "Tell him that we will not be able to travel tomorrow. My father cannot go farther, and I will not leave him." Bruno left. Verity and Elizabeth slept, wrapped tightly in each other's arms. Ursula tried again to get her father to sip the tea, but again with no success. She settled back to watch over him. Suddenly, without warning, he sat bolt upright and called her name. "Ursula!" She was at his side immediately. "Lie down, father. Do not try to speak." "No, I must tell you." He forced the words out, then gave in to a fit of coughing that seemed to last interminably. "Hush, father, you must rest." Ursula tried to soothe him, but he only became more agitated. "The wolf! The wolf!" Her father's eyes stared. He made an enormous effort to speak further. "What wolf? There's no wolf, father." Ursula held him tightly. The shaking shoulders felt more fragile than Verity's. "Calm yourself, father. Do not disturb yourself so." "You must." The old man would not give up the struggle, his eyes fixed on Ursula with the frantic need to speak. "You must look to the wolf, daughter." His eyes closed, and he sank back into Ursula's arms. He began to mutter incoherently. She lowered him to the ground and rearranged the cloak snugly around him, but he was deep in delirium again. "The Count will give us no help." Bruno came quietly back into the firelight and looked down at Master William. "He says that if your father is too ill to continue, he must be left at the next village and you must go on." "I will not," Ursula answered. "I will not leave my father." But in the event she was forced to. The next morning, when she knelt beside him and touched his shoulder to waken him, he was dead. Sometime during the night, while she had dozed fitfully beside him, he had simply stopped the struggle to breathe. For him now, the journey was over. Not, however, for Ursula. The Count sent them 2 men so that she and Bruno could bury her father, and a priest to give him absolution. They laid him in the shelter of an ancient elder tree. The elder tree was a magic tree, so many healers believed. the mother under whose protection all herbs grew and thrived. It was a special tree, full of the love of mankind. "Protect my father's body," Ursula prayed, as the dirt gradually covered the shallow grave and the priest murmured his blessing. "Speed his soul to God." They packed up their meager belongings. In a few days, so the Count's men told her, they would be in Constantinople. Ursula said farewell to her father as she trudged out of sight of his grave, and then turned her face forward again, but in her mind she was looking back. Back along the trail they had left behind them, all the way to Cologne. The trail of ruin, destruction, and death.